Did you really think you could get away with that? Jory's voice cut through the air like a knife, her fists clenched at her sides. Ethan Marcus, the wealthy mogul who had belittled her co-worker for the last time, stood frozen, his confident smirk replaced by a look of shock. "What did you just say?" he sneered, stepping closer. As the rest of the store went silent, every eye locked on the showdown. The tension in the air was palpable. Jory had had enough. 4 years, Jory Lame had watched the world bend to the whims of the powerful, the rich, and the entitled. As a 17-year-old high school senior working part-time at Harvest Market, a grocery store frequented by La's elite, she knew that privilege was the invisible hand guiding the lives of the wealthy. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment when Ethan Marcus, a 72-year-old tech mogul, turned his arrogance on her and the people she cared about. Ethan's presence in the store wasn't just as a customer, it was as a reminder of the system that kept people like Jory in their place. And when he publicly humiliated one of her co-workers, accusing them of stealing over a simple mistake, something inside Jory snapped. She'd had enough of watching the wealthy use their power to destroy lives, all while their victims stood helpless in the face of their tyranny. But this time, Jory wasn't standing down. She wasn't backing off. In a moment that would change everything, she turned to face Ethan and, with a fire that burned hotter than ever, confronted him in front of the entire store. "Did you really think you could get away with that?" It was a moment of defiance that would go viral within hours, starting a chain reaction no one could have predicted. Jory was about to learn that standing up to the powerful was dangerous, but it was also the first step toward a battle she was destined to win. The seeds of a revolution had been planted, and the story was only just beginning. Welcome back, family. Before we start today's story, I want to pause and celebrate something special. We just crossed 40 subscribers, and that means we're officially on the road to our first 1,000. To everyone who already subscribed, thank you. You're the foundation of this channel, and your support tells me these stories matter. If you're watching and haven't subscribed yet, I'm asking from the heart, join us. When you subscribe and share these stories with friends and family who believe in second chances, real love, healing, and the truth behind betrayal, you help this community grow into something powerful. We're closer than ever, and with your support, that 1,000 subscriber milestone is absolutely within reach. Now let's get back into the story. Jory had always known that she was destined for something bigger than bagging groceries. Born and raised in the heart of Los Angeles, she had dreams that stretched far beyond the aisles of Harvest Market. But in a city like this, where power often spoke louder than ambition, the road to success was never as simple as working hard. It was about who you knew, what you had, and who you could crush along the way. Ethan Marcus was the embodiment of everything Jory had fought against her entire life. Little did she know, their confrontation would set her on a path that would take her to the very top, and force the powerful to reckon with the consequences of their actions. The moment the words left her mouth, the store went eerily silent. Ethan's sneer faltered, his usually calm composure cracking just for an instant. But it was enough. The sound of phones clicking, the whispered gasps from the crowd, the way the air in the room thickened, Jory knew instantly that something had changed. She hadn't just stood up to Ethan Marcus. She had done something more. She had lit a fuse. It took less than an hour for the video of Jory confronting Ethan to go viral. By the time she was off her shift and walking out of the back door of Harvest Market, she could feel the buzz in the air. Her phone, which had stayed dormant in her pocket, vibrated incessantly. Texts, notifications, news alerts, it was overwhelming. Jory hesitated before picking it up. Scrolling through the messages, her eyes widened in disbelief. Tweets, Instagram posts, and videos flooded the internet, all with one common theme: praise for her bravery. Comments ranged from "Jory is a queen" to "this is what courage looks like," and finally, someone standing up to the rich. The video had been shared tens of thousands of times. It wasn't just local news. National outlets were picking up the story. By the time Jory got home, her face was on the front page of news websites. Headlines screamed things like, "Teen confronts billionaire's arrogance and grocery store showdown. A 17-year-old takes on power." She didn't recognize the woman in the headlines, but it was undeniably her. Jory's social media exploded with support. People from all walks of life, from high school students to business professionals, flooded her inbox, offering words of encouragement. The support felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But amid the praise, there was a shadow, a creeping unease. Ethan Marcus, the man she had confronted, was no stranger to the media. As a retired tech mogul, his influence in Los Angeles extended far beyond business. He was a fixture in the world of high society, an elder statesman of the Silicon Valley elite, whose power had always been unquestioned. Ethan wasn't the type to let something like a viral video slide. And as Jory would soon learn, his influence was much more dangerous than she could have imagined. The following morning, Jory received a call at home from her boss at Harvest Market, Greg, a man in his mid-40s who always wore a constant look of mild frustration. "Jory, we need to talk." Greg's voice sounded strained, like he had been rehearsing what to say. "Talk about what?" she asked, already bracing herself. "I've been getting calls," Greg said. "From Ethan's people. He's not happy, and he's got connections. Some big names asking questions about the incident. You've made some waves, and well, let's just say this situation is going to be harder to manage than I thought." Her heart dropped. "So, what does that mean for me?" "It means we're under pressure. Ethan's not going to let this go easily. He's pulling strings to make sure this whole thing goes away. Jory, I can't promise you'll have your job much longer if this keeps up." Jory's fingers tightened around her phone. She wasn't surprised. Ethan had likely already pulled his weight in the background. But hearing it out loud made it all feel real. The battle was no longer just about what had happened at Harvest Market. It was about the forces behind it. And they had power. "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising anger in her chest. No, not a threat. Just a heads up. I'm trying to keep you out of this mess. But if I don't back down, I'm out of a job," she finished for him, her words sharp. "I'm not saying that," Greg said quickly, but it was clear that the pressure was mounting. "But you need to think carefully. Ethan's got a lot of pull in this city. And I don't know if this is a fight you can win." The call ended there, and Jory was left staring at her phone screen, staring at the little bubbles that marked incoming texts, her mind racing. The adrenaline from the night before had worn off, and now, the reality of her situation hit her with full force. This wasn't a simple act of rebellion. It wasn't just a viral moment. Ethan's retaliation could destroy everything she had. But as she sat in silence, a new resolve began to settle in. This was her fight now, and if Ethan thought he could intimidate her, he had another thing coming. As Jory stood her ground, staring Ethan down in her mind's eye, she couldn't help but think of all the others who had been silenced by his kind of power. She thought of all the people who had walked away when faced with threats, the ones who had bowed down to the wealthy and powerful because they believed there was no other way. She wasn't going to be one of them. She couldn't let him win. And neither should you. If you're watching this and believe that standing up for what's right matters, then you know how important this fight is. Jory didn't back down in the face of unimaginable pressure. She didn't bow to the forces that wanted to crush her, she rose above them. Don't just watch. Stay with us. There's more to come, and you'll want to be part of this. Subscribe now. This fight isn't over. The public backlash grew in intensity. Ethan's people worked overtime to discredit her, planting stories in tabloids questioning her character. They tried to paint Jory as an attention seeker, someone who was only interested in the spotlight. News outlets dug into her background, combing through social media posts to find anything they could use against her. But Jory wasn't backing down. Her phone rang again, this time from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "You don't know me," the voice said, "but I've been watching what you've done, and I think you've got what it takes. If you want to keep this fight going, you're going to need more than just the internet cheering you on. There are people who can help you." Jory didn't answer immediately. Who was this? How did they know so much? But the invitation was clear. This wasn't just about one viral video anymore. This was a war, and Jory was about to find out just how far the battle would go, and how far she was willing to take it. This was just the beginning. The first time Jory felt the full weight of Ethan Marcus' influence was the moment she received the email from Harvest Market's HR department. Dear Jory Lame, we regret to inform you that your employment with Harvest Market has been terminated, effective immediately. This decision comes after careful consideration and review of recent events. We appreciate the time you have spent with us and wish you the best in your future endeavors. Jory stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the words. Terminated. The word hit her harder than anything Ethan had said or done. This wasn't just about standing up to him in that moment anymore. This was retaliation, plain and simple. Ethan had used his power to pull the strings from behind the scenes, making sure that her job, the one she had fought for, the one she used to help support her family, was taken away. The anger that had been simmering in her chest suddenly boiled over. She grabbed her phone, scrolling furiously through the news. Headlines that had once praised her bravery now read, Harvest Market fires employee after viral confrontation with Billionaire. Ethan had done more than just push her out of her job. He had made her the face of something much bigger, and his retaliation was a move to silence her before she could do any more damage to his reputation. But Jory wasn't backing down. News of Jory's firing spread like wildfire. Tweets, Instagram stories, and news reports were flooded with outrage. People were furious. Jory was the symbol of a much-needed fight against the unchecked privilege and corruption of powerful people like Ethan Marcus. People who thought they could treat others however they wanted and face no consequences. Supporters rallied behind her. Protests outside Harvest Market began that very afternoon, growing larger by the hour. Protesters marched with signs that read, #Justice for Jory and power to the people. It wasn't just a few people. It was a movement. Jory had sparked something she never imagined. People from all walks of life were now standing up for what they believed was right, standing against the wealthy elite who used their power to trample on others. The more the protests grew, the more the media covered it. Soon, news outlets were questioning the ethics of Harvest Market, the very same store that once marketed itself as a community staple, proud to serve locals. Now, with Ethan Marcus behind the scenes, the store was exposed as another pawn in his empire of influence. Jory's story wasn't just about her firing anymore. It was about the system. About how the rich could break laws, manipulate people, and still walk away unscathed. That was the image Ethan had projected onto her, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. As the protests outside Harvest Market raged on, Jory sat in her bedroom, staring at her phone, watching the world unfold. For the first time in days, her mind wasn't racing with panic. It was focused. She had started something she couldn't stop now, even if Ethan tried to end it. There were too many people now who had seen the truth. Too many who had heard her story. She wouldn't let them down. She couldn't. With newfound determination, Jory opened her laptop and began typing. She would use her platform to expose Ethan for who he really was, someone who used his wealth and influence to manipulate and hurt those beneath him. She had been fired, but that was only the beginning. Her voice was louder than ever now. Jory had always known something wasn't right with Ethan, but now, she started digging. She reached out to former employees, ex-business partners, anyone who might have insight into Ethan's dealings. And what she found made her blood run cold. Small clues started to fall into place. One former employee, a quiet woman named Laura, had worked with Ethan for nearly a decade before mysteriously leaving the company. She spoke to Jory about the unethical practices Ethan had forced her to cover up. There were whispers of financial manipulation, employees fired without cause, contracts signed under duress, and bribes exchanged to push through questionable deals. But the real shock came when Jory stumbled upon an old email exchange hidden in a public database of company documents. It was an email from Ethan to a high-ranking official in the city government, discussing a deal for a multi-million-dollar project that had a clear, illegal incentive tied to it. This was bigger than Jory could have ever imagined. Ethan had built his empire on lies, exploitation, and secrecy. And now, Jory had the evidence. She had everything she needed to expose him for the fraud he truly was. Jory stood up from her desk, her heart pounding. This was it. Ethan had made his move, but now, it was time for hers. Ethan may have thought he could take everything from her, her job, her peace of mind, her place in the world. But what he didn't realize was that by pushing her, he'd awoken something inside Jory. A fire that wouldn't go out. This wasn't just about a viral video anymore. This was war. And Jory wasn't going to stop until she had brought him down. The gloves were off. Jory's life had changed in ways she never imagined. One moment, she was an unknown teenager, trying to make it in a world stacked against her. The next, she was the face of a movement, a symbol of resistance against everything Ethan Marcus stood for. But the fight was just beginning. If anything, it had only gotten more dangerous. The more Jory researched Ethan's empire, the more she realized how much he had hidden beneath the surface. It wasn't just his behavior at Harvest Market. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered about the web of lies, manipulation, and corruption that Ethan had spun over the years. As the media storm raged on, Jory realized she couldn't take Ethan down alone. She needed allies, people who knew the dark corners of his world. So, she reached out. First to the former employees who had come forward with their stories. Then to whistleblowers who had been silenced by the weight of Ethan's power. One of the first people to answer was Laura, the former employee she had spoken to before. Laura had worked for Ethan's tech empire for almost a decade, but after forced resignation, she had disappeared from the public eye. Now, she was ready to speak. "I never thought anyone would listen," Laura said on their first phone call. "But after what you did, I think people are finally waking up. I've been watching everything unfold." The two met in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of LA. Laura slid a folder across the table to Jory, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Inside, there were emails, financial statements, and documents that detailed shady business practices, employee exploitation, and more. But it was the recordings that took Jory's breath away. As Jory listened to the recordings Laura had uncovered, she could hardly believe her ears. One recording was a conversation between Ethan and a city official, casually discussing how to arrange zoning permits in exchange for a hefty donation to the official's campaign. Another involved a meeting with contractors, where Ethan threatened to ruin their careers if they didn't agree to overpriced contracts. The more Jory pieced things together, the more she understood the depth of Ethan's power. His wealth wasn't just built on tech investments. It was built on fraud, bribery, and a network of corrupt deals that spanned decades. Ethan had manipulated systems and people in ways that seemed almost too intricate to unravel. Yet, Jory was determined to do it. It wasn't just about a bad CEO anymore. This was a man who had used his money to control entire industries, and Jory had found the evidence to prove it. But then, one night, something even bigger fell into her lap. Jory was combing through some old financial documents when she found it, a file buried deep in a cloud storage account. It was titled Q4 2016, Corporate Assets Adjustment. As Jory opened the document, her heart skipped. It was a detailed report outlining a massive financial fraud scheme, a diversion of funds from one of Ethan's subsidiaries to offshore accounts, all in the name of tax evasion and corporate gain. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars funneled into fake projects, millions more hidden away in accounts that didn't exist. And buried within the pages was something that sent a chill down Jory's spine: the names of people involved. High-level executives, city officials, and even attorneys who had helped Ethan cover up the scheme. This was the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that could bring down Ethan Marcus. But as Jory stared at the document, her hands trembling, she knew the risks of exposing it. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. This was about taking down an empire, and the people who ran it would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Ethan's reach was everywhere. The consequences of revealing this information were far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. But she couldn't turn back now. Jory's life was about to change forever. She'd uncovered something bigger than she imagined, and the stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was for everyone who had ever been crushed by someone like Ethan. The web of corruption and greed was deep, but Jory had the truth on her side. If you believe in standing up for what's right, now's the time. The road ahead won't be easy, but Jory isn't alone. Stay with us, because the truth is just beginning to unfold. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe now, this fight is far from over. The discovery marked a turning point. Jory wasn't just some teenager fighting for her job anymore. She was about to expose a network of corruption that could change everything. But with every step she took closer to the truth, the more dangerous her world became. Ethan had made it clear, no one challenged him without consequences. But Jory was ready to see it through. After all, what was the point of winning if you didn't fight for what mattered? Jory stood outside the sleek glass building, her heart pounding in her chest. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, and it would change everything. No longer just a teenager, she was about to walk into the lion's den with nothing but the truth at her side. Ethan Marcus had built his empire on manipulation, lies, and broken people. But now, Jory had the evidence to tear it all down. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back into the present. It was a text from Laura, one of her new allies. "You've got this. The world is watching." Taking a deep breath, Jory stepped forward and entered the building. The moment she walked through the revolving doors, she could feel the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a war. Inside the boardroom, Jory was met with the cold gaze of some of the most powerful people in the business world. CEOs, investors, and executives, they all sat around a massive polished table, their eyes wary as they sized her up. They had heard the rumors, seen the headlines, and now they were about to hear the truth from the source herself. Jory took a seat at the head of the table, the evidence she had carefully collected laid out before her. She glanced around the room, the weight of her next words pressing heavily on her chest. She could feel Ethan's presence, even though he hadn't arrived yet. His influence was everywhere, but not for long. With a calm, controlled voice, Jory began. "I'm here because this company, and many like it, have been built on the backs of people like me. People you've silenced for too long. Ethan Marcus's empire isn't built on innovation or vision. It's built on lies, deception, and exploitation. And I have the proof." The room went dead silent. Jory opened her laptop and began to present the evidence, piece by piece. She showed them the emails, the recordings, the financial documents that linked Ethan to corrupt deals, fraudulent activities, and illegal contracts. Every document she presented was a dagger to Ethan's legacy, a reminder of the destruction he had caused to countless lives in his quest for more power. But Jory didn't just present the facts. She made them feel the weight of it. She explained the human cost of Ethan's manipulation, how he destroyed families, crushed dreams, and taken away opportunities for countless people. She used her voice not just to speak the truth, but to make it resonate in their hearts. "Ethan has built his wealth on the backs of the oppressed," she said, her voice unwavering. "And it's time the truth comes to light. You all have a choice to make today. Will you continue to protect a man who has built his empire on lies, or will you take a stand for what's right?" The doors to the boardroom swung open with a crash, and Ethan walked in, his presence immediately filling the room. He was dressed impeccably, the picture of a powerful man used to having his way. But the look on his face, cold, calculated, was one Jory had seen all too often in the past. "Enough of this nonsense," Ethan snapped, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This is a business meeting, not some publicity stunt. I'm not here to entertain this wild accusation." He walked toward the table, trying to command the room with his forceful presence. He was used to being in control, to manipulating the narrative. But today, Jory was in charge. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stood up and locked eyes with him. "This isn't nonsense, Ethan," Jory replied, her voice steady. "This is your empire coming to an end. The truth is here, and it's more powerful than you ever were." Ethan attempted to rally his allies, his influence and wealth failing to intimidate anyone in the room. The board of directors, once loyal to him, were beginning to turn. Jory's words, her unwavering belief in what was right, were sinking in. They could see the evidence. They could hear the truth. And the walls around Ethan began to crumble. Ethan tried everything he could to silence her. He threw money at the problem, tried to discredit her, but it was too late. The truth had already won. The evidence was irrefutable, and the board knew it. One by one, they turned against him. The same men and women who had once propped him up now realized they were complicit in his corruption. As the tension in the room reached its peak, one of the investors stood up. "We can't continue to ignore this," they said, their voice resolute. "Ethan, your actions have jeopardized everything this company stands for. I'm voting to remove you from the board." Ethan's face twisted in disbelief, his power slipping through his fingers like sand. He looked at Jory, his eyes burning with fury, but it was clear he had lost. Jory stood tall, her heart racing as the final vote was cast. She had won. Ethan Marcus was no longer in control. His empire had crumbled. Jory left the meeting with her head held high. The battle had been brutal, but the victory was sweet. Ethan's power had crumbled in the face of truth. His network of influence had shattered, and his empire was beginning to collapse. The world was watching, and Jory had just proven that one person, no matter how young or inexperienced, could change everything. This was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. But today, Jory had won. Ethan Marcus was on the brink of his biggest victory in years. The $650 million clean energy deal he had worked tirelessly to secure was about to go through. It was a deal that would not only cement his status in the corporate world but also secure his financial future, allowing him to further entrench his empire of power and influence. But as he prepared for the final signature, everything began to unravel. Jory knew the stakes. She had seen the media storm surrounding her grow larger by the day, the protests intensifying, and the public outrage reaching new heights. But she also knew that Ethan's last move, the $650 million deal, was the key to everything. It was his lifeline, the one thing that could save him from the downward spiral she had set in motion. With the deal still on the table and in its final stages, Jory saw an opportunity to deliver the decisive blow. If she could expose Ethan's role in manipulating the deal, it would cripple him. It was no longer just about standing up for herself. It was about bringing down the man who had used his wealth to destroy lives. Jory turned to the contacts she had built over the past weeks, including Laura, and dug deeper. She found evidence of Ethan's manipulative tactics, how he had leveraged bribes and threats to pressure the clean energy company into a partnership that was more beneficial to him than the company itself. The deal wasn't about advancing clean energy. It was about lining Ethan's pockets and furthering his control. The moment of truth came when Jory stood in front of a packed press conference, the weight of the world on her shoulders. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, and industry insiders. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, knowing that it was now or never. With the evidence in hand, Jory addressed the room, her voice steady but filled with the authority that had come from weeks of fighting for what was right. The $650 million deal with clean tech energy, she began, her gaze sweeping across the room, was never about advancing sustainability. It was a corrupt scheme, one designed to pad the pockets of a billionaire at the expense of the very people who needed it most. The reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, the room growing silent. "I have the evidence that proves Ethan Marcus manipulated the deal, using bribery, threats, and intimidation to push it through. This partnership was never about a vision for a cleaner future. It was about control, money, and power." The room erupted. Gasps. Shouted questions. Camera flashes popping off like firecrackers. Effective immediately, Jory continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. Brightwave Innovations is cancelling any further negotiations with Ethan Marcus and his company. The deal is off. It was done. The deal that Ethan had relied on for his comeback had evaporated in an instant. Jory had just ended it, with the world watching. Ethan had spent the past several weeks preparing for this moment. He was ready to finalize the deal, secure his financial future, and restore his public image. But as Jory spoke, the walls began to close in. The first news outlet to pick up the story was a major financial network. By the time the day ended, headlines were flooding in. Jory Lame exposes $650 million deal as corrupt scheme, Ethan Marcus empire crumbles. $650 million deal cancelled amid scandal. Billionaire business mogul Ethan Marcus faces backlash as $650 million deal collapses. It was a swift and brutal fall from grace. Investors who had once trusted Ethan pulled their funding. Stocks in his company began to plummet. What was once thought of as a guaranteed success story turned into an unprecedented disaster. By the evening, Ethan was a pariah. News outlets ran story after story detailing his history of manipulation and greed. The tapes, the financial documents, the bribery, it was all out in the open. His network of influence, built over decades, was in ruins. And in the midst of it all, Jory's name shone brighter than ever. Jory sat back in her chair, the weight of what she had just accomplished settling over her. The empire Ethan had built was crumbling before her eyes, and she had been the one to bring it down. But even with the victory, she knew it wasn't over yet. There were still battles to fight, and she couldn't stop now. Ethan's fall had begun. His empire, built on exploitation and deceit, was slowly disintegrating, and it was clear that this was only the first chapter in a much bigger story. Jory wasn't just a symbol anymore. She was a force. And the world was watching. Jory hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to become the spark that ignited a firestorm. But here she was, at the center of a movement that was growing by the day, shaking the very foundations of corporate America. It started with the protests outside Harvest Market, people holding signs with her face on them, chanting her name. What had begun as a simple act of defiance in the grocery store was now a rallying cry for everyone who had ever been overlooked, oppressed, or silenced by the powerful. Jory's actions had awakened something in people. Workers who had been mistreated, activists who had been fighting for years without recognition, and ordinary people fed up with the growing divide between the rich and the rest of society all rallied behind her. Social media exploded with support. Hashtags like *justice for Jory *and *take down the elite * trending for days. The protests grew larger and louder, spilling out of Los Angeles and into cities across the country. The message was simple. Corporate greed and corruption had gone unchecked for too long, and it was time for change. Jory's story was a beacon of hope. She was a teenager, someone they could relate to, not a billionaire, not a politician, but an ordinary person who had had enough. And her fight wasn't just hers anymore. It was for everyone who had been crushed by the system. The streets were filled with voices demanding justice. People held signs, not just for Jory, but for themselves. For their own rights. For a future where the powerful couldn't manipulate the rules for their own gain. As the protests escalated, so did the media's coverage of Jory's story. News outlets, talk shows, and podcasts all clamored to get an interview with the young woman who had become a symbol of resistance. The more they heard her story, the more they realized Jory wasn't just a local hero. She was the voice of a generation. The spotlight was on her in ways she could never have imagined. She appeared on national news broadcasts, was invited to speak at major conferences, and her interviews were featured in some of the most respected publications in the world. She wasn't just a teenage girl anymore. She was a leader, and her words resonated deeply with anyone who had ever felt powerless. The power of Jory's words wasn't just in what she said, but in how she said it. With calm, unwavering confidence, she spoke the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was for the people in power. "I'm not here for fame," she said in one interview. "I'm here because the system is broken, and I refuse to sit back while people like Ethan Marcus destroy everything for the rest of us." Her honesty, courage, and determination made her a force to be reckoned with. And the public took notice. As the movement gained traction, Jory found herself in high demand. Companies, non-profits, and even politicians reached out to her, eager to work alongside her to bring about change. She was invited to sit on corporate boards, not just as a symbol of resistance, but as a real voice in the fight for corporate accountability. The same people who had once dismissed her as a naive teenager were now asking for her input, desperate for a piece of the energy that surrounded her. Jory was cautious but open. She knew that change couldn't come from the top down alone. She needed to work from within the system to tear it down, to push for policies that would protect workers, hold corporations accountable, and ensure that the rich no longer ruled the world with impunity. But even as the offers rolled in, Jory never lost sight of why she started this fight. It wasn't for money. It wasn't for fame. It was for the people who had been crushed by the system and silenced by those with too much power. Jory wasn't just leading a movement. She was shaping a new world. The power of her story wasn't just in the protests or the media frenzy. It was in the conversations it sparked, the awareness it raised, and the action it inspired. The public wasn't just rallying behind her because of what she had done. They were rallying behind her because they saw themselves in her. They saw a young woman who refused to be silenced by the system, who stood up when the world told her to sit down. They saw a leader in the making, and they wanted to be a part of the change she was bringing. Jory knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The system wasn't going to collapse overnight, but every protest, every interview, every person who joined her movement was a step closer to true accountability. She had proven that one voice, no matter how young or inexperienced, could challenge the most powerful forces in the world. And she wasn't stopping now. Jory was no longer just the girl who stood up to Ethan Marcus in a grocery store. She was the leader of a movement, the face of a revolution. And the world was listening. The fight was far from over, but Jory was ready. The future was hers, and she was determined to take it. Jory stood on the steps of her new office, the morning sun casting long shadows over the bustling city streets below. Just a few months ago, she was working part-time at Harvest Market, trying to make ends meet while dreaming of a better future. Now, she had become the face of a revolution, a symbol of everything that could be changed when the voiceless refused to stay silent. Her rise to power wasn't something she had sought. It wasn't something she'd ever imagined for herself. But now that she had it, she knew she had to use it for something bigger than herself. Jory wasn't content with just taking down one corrupt billionaire. She was determined to reshape the entire system that allowed people like Ethan Marcus to thrive at the expense of everyone else. With the media attention still soaring, Jory took the next step in her journey. She launched her own non-profit. The Equal Voices Project was dedicated to fighting corporate greed and advocating for workers' rights. It was a place where everyday people could come together, share their stories, and find the support they needed to stand up to the system that had kept them down for so long. Jory's voice resonated not just because of what she had done, but because of the way she framed the issues. She wasn't just fighting for fair wages or better working conditions. She was fighting for the very principle that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter their background or job title. Her message was simple but powerful. Power shouldn't belong to the few. It belongs to the many. And together, we will change the world. Her non-profit began to attract attention from activists, workers, and even some sympathetic corporations that saw the value in doing business with integrity. What started as a small movement quickly grew into a network that spanned the country, and Jory began to use her platform to push for legislative changes, calling for stronger laws that held companies accountable for their treatment of workers and their environmental impact. As Jory's influence grew, so did the investigation into Ethan Marcus's past. News outlets dug deeper, uncovering more and more about the crooked deals, tax evasion schemes, and bribes that had been buried for years. The evidence she had presented was just the tip of the iceberg. With mounting pressure, law enforcement agencies started moving in. In the face of mounting evidence, Ethan's empire began to crumble. His fortune, once seen as untouchable, started to slip away as his wealth was frozen and his assets seized. The clean energy deal he had been counting on fell through completely, leaving him with nothing but his crumbling reputation. Even his most loyal supporters abandoned him, unable to deny the truth that Jory had so bravely exposed. It wasn't long before criminal charges were filed. The court started to move swiftly, and Ethan Marcus was arrested. The man who had once ruled the business world with an iron fist was now facing the consequences of his actions. His public disgrace was swift. Once elite investors pulled out of his remaining ventures, his influence evaporated, and his name became synonymous with corporate corruption. The empire that had taken decades to build was now a shadow of its former self, and Jory's victory was complete. But Jory wasn't done yet. Her fight had never been about one man. It had always been about changing a broken system. And now, with her newfound power and platform, she was determined to keep pushing for change. The world was waking up to the reality of what corporate greed could do, and Jory was going to make sure it stayed in the public's mind. She began working on a series of initiatives aimed at reforming corporate laws, pushing for more transparency in financial reporting and stricter penalties for companies that violated workers' rights. Jory's voice, once a whisper of resistance, was now a clarion call for a new era of accountability. Her journey wasn't without its challenges. She faced pressure from powerful figures who still wanted to protect their interests. But Jory had faced down the toughest battle of her life, and nothing was going to stop her now. Jory's legacy wasn't just about ending Ethan's reign of corruption. It was about inspiring a new generation to take a stand. She became a mentor, a role model, and a fierce advocate for the voiceless. She encouraged young people to speak up, to demand better, and to never back down, because if she could change the system, so could they. As Jory sat in the office she had built, looking out over the city she had fought so hard to change, she couldn't help but smile. Her journey had been long, and it had been painful, but it had been worth it. The system had tried to silence her, but now she was louder than ever. The fight was far from over, but one thing was clear: Jory Lame had made her mark on the world. And nothing, not wealth, not power, not fear, could take that away. Her legacy had only just begun. The air was thick with anticipation as Jory stepped into the conference hall. This was the moment she had been working for, the culmination of everything she had fought for. The crowd was waiting, the media cameras trained on her, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. Ethan Marcus had fallen. His empire was in ruins, and his name had become synonymous with greed, manipulation, and corruption. But Jory knew this was bigger than just Ethan. This was about the system, the unchecked power of the elite that had ruined lives for far too long. And now, she was here to make sure that change wasn't just a fleeting moment. Standing at the podium, Jory surveyed the room. It was a gathering of the country's most powerful CEOs, political figures, and activists. But there was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her voice. She had faced down some of the most powerful people in the world, and she had come out on top. Today, she began, her voice strong and unwavering, we are not just talking about one man's downfall. We are talking about an entire system that has failed us. A system that allows people like Ethan Marcus to exploit, manipulate, and destroy the lives of everyday people without consequence. Jory paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. She wasn't here to gloat. She wasn't here to point fingers at one person. She was here to make sure this moment marked the beginning of something bigger. It's time for a new era of accountability, she continued. An era where we hold the powerful to the same standards as everyone else. Where the systems of exploitation are dismantled, and the voices of those who have been silenced for too long are finally heard. The applause was deafening. Jory stood tall, her heart racing, knowing that this moment, this speech, was her final act in the fight against corporate corruption. She had taken on Ethan Marcus and brought down his empire. But it was never about one man. It was about changing the game. The work wasn't over. Jory knew that. The fight she had started was only the beginning. But as she looked out at the room, she saw something she hadn't seen before: hope. Hope that change was possible. Hope that the fight against corporate greed and systemic corruption wasn't a lost cause. Jory had become the voice of a new generation, a generation that refused to accept the status quo. She had sparked a movement that would continue to grow, continue to challenge the powerful, and continue to demand justice for those who had been left behind. The corporate world, for all its money and influence, had underestimated the power of one person standing up for what was right. And now, it was too late. Jory had reshaped the industry, changed the conversation, and set the wheels of justice in motion. As she walked off the stage, Jory felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The journey had been long, and the toll it had taken on her was real. She had lost friends, faced threats, and endured countless sleepless nights. But it had all been worth it. The victory was hers, but it was also for everyone who had ever been crushed by the weight of the system. Jory's journey wasn't just about one person. It was about all of us standing up to the systems that silence us. It's about the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Jory showed us that one voice can make a difference. Her fight wasn't easy, but it was necessary. If you've been inspired by her fight for justice, you know it's time to act. The systems that have oppressed us for so long are still in place. But if we stand together, we can change the world. Stay with us, subscribe now and be part of this revolution. Because Jory's victory is just the beginning. The fight for a better future has only just begun. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. And do well to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next story.